Have you ever seen a whale in a bikini?
Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Hope everyone had a good day. Going to go through some more comedy albums. Going through quite a few of them, but we've also got a ton of CDs at some point. But we'll do these tonight.
So next Friday night, having Lenny Bruce.
All right. That was a little bit Alan Sherman. So we'll start with this. A whole bunch of old 50s and 60s ones here, actually. Start with Nichols and May. They actually came out of early version of Second City, which cranked out a lot of people from Saturday Night Live. But they, I had to look up a little more about them, but they're a comedy team. And then they went on to a lot of writing and directing, both theater and touchstone movies of our history. So Mike Nichols, who just passed away a few years ago, pulled up a couple things. Did a ton of Broadway theater as the director and producer. A lot of things you would know, including Spamalot. He did a version of Spamalot. Recently, The Odd Couple, Barefoot in the Park. When Nichols and May were still together as a comedy team, they did a Broadway production as well. But as far as directing, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, The Graduate, Catch-22, Gilda Live, let's see, Biloxi Blues, Working Girl, Postcards from the Edge, The Birdcage, Primary Colors, Charlie Wilson's War, final film there. But and he did a lot of television as well. But yeah, they cranked a lot. And Elaine May actually wrote The Birdcage, I believe. The Birdcage and Primary Colors. So they had a long, illustrious career as working comedians here in. But started out doing comedy albums and worked in a couple of one of the first real improvisational couples. All right, let's see here. And then I've got pulled out my Laugh-In albums for those of us old enough to remember Laugh-In. It was a very hip show for its time. And it had a lot of people gone on to do a lot of things. Gary Olson was the narrator. They had Joanne Worley, who did a lot of Broadway. Goldie Hawn started out as a dancer, became an actress. Henry Gibson did a lot of stand-up and comedy. Ruth Buzzy, I believe, is still working a little bit with Sesame Street. So that's from their actual TV show. And it was actually called Roland and Martin's Laugh-In. So there's Hugh and Roland. They were a stand-up duo that worked into. I think they did a lot of give and take between each other and did some pretty interesting stuff over the years before they got their show. Had a lot of political humor. Remember, it was a big deal that they got Richard. How's it going, David? Got Richard Nixon to do an appearance. I don't think Richard Nixon always got the humor because they went after a lot of political figures. It had Henry Gibson. It was a very interesting comic. I think he wrote a lot for the show as well. And this is one of his stand-up albums. He was involved in Laugh-In. And for the younger group here, people who may know him, he was the leader of the Nazi group in the Blues Brothers. But he had a long career in TV and movies. And then Pat Paulson, he had a little bit of tie with Laugh-In. He was very strange, very deadpan, and very dry comedian. But he also, up until his death, every time there was an election, he would actually fill out the paperwork so he could run for president. And that was part of his shtick. He'd go on TV shows and ramble on, and had a very weird platform he would make up. And this one actually still had Arlen's Records. Still has a handwritten serial code there. It was $4.79 when it came out on Mercury Records back in the day. This is 1968 on this one. Let's see. I also pulled out 2 David Fry albums. David Fry was a very he did a couple of comedy albums. He was also involved with another one we'll go over here, but it was very much political humor, and it's very dated today. He was really not a friend of Richard Nixon's, and got a lot of interesting people. David Fry, Richard Nixon parody. It lists a lot of people and he did a lot of voices, I believe. But this was the first one, and then he did his follow-up, David Fry Richard Nixon Superstar, parody of Jesus Christ Superstar. Again, it was very, very popular. This came out 73, 74. They did really well at the time, or fairly well, but it's an interesting thing with comedy albums. They always date themselves. And I also pulled out Shelley Berman, whom I've only heard some of his comedy albums. I haven't listened to a whole lot of them. I know he's did a lot of acting as well. Matter of fact, I pulled it up on here. It was in Rawhide. He did a lot of movies where he looked like a character actor. Did a ton of television. All the way to 2012, he was in an episode of Hawaii Five-0. He was in Curb Your Enthusiasm, playing the father of the main character. But he had a career as a stand-up comedian, working the clubs for quite a few years. There's another one of his albums, and then there's pull this one out is Sex Life Primate. Interesting album. Notice the other 2 people, Jerry Stiller and Ann Mira. Again, it was comedy was much more sketch driven. Verve for a long time actually did a lot of comedy albums along with a lot of jazz. But that leads us to I pulled 2 of their albums as well. I've got this nice promo copy of Jerry Stiller and Ann Mira. You would recognize them, Jerry Stiller anyway, from the Seinfeld show. And they were a comedy team for years. That's his wife, Ann Mira. And they are the parents of Ben Stiller. But they were doing a lot of comedy. And my first remembrance of them was actually they did a series of Jack in the Box commercials when I was a kid. But Jerry Stiller was a pretty wild man then. And then we've got Alan Sherman. It's probably the most musical of the and we played a little sample real quick of Hello Mother, Hello Father there.
I am back.
Made a whole career of doing parody songs. Kind of in the Weird Al vein, but he cranked them out. My Son the Celebrity, Alan Etcha, all of them, several of them had hits. Alan Sherman and his friends, Jake Song, Satchel and Seek, Tennessee. Singing for Livers Only, Mrs. Goldfarb, Pop Hates the Beatles. There's a nice title on that one. America's Nice Italian Name, 12 Gifts of Christmas, Bye Bye Bloomberg. Said most of it wasn't too political, just mostly parodies. And some of them hold up pretty well. Hello Mother, Hello Father, which is probably his best known one. Yeah, let's see. Oh, and some of these actually got reissued. A lot of their stuff on Rhino back in when Rhino was first starting up, because they could reissue a lot of stuff from their childhood because they started up in the 80s. Let's see here. And we'll go into I'll save that for last. we'll pull up these albums here. This is the first family with Von Meter, and I actually, when I was younger and went to school, had a lot of well-known character comedian and actors acting out skits, parody of, again, a record album parody before there was the internet thing. And this album was like the top seller at the time that JFK was assassinated, and suddenly making fun of the president wasn't quite as humorous, and it like dropped like a rock. But they were correct. This album was out, and they actually had just put out the second one in that series. Like I said, it was a huge selling album. And as a matter of fact, you can find it all the time and cut out in Goodwill, because it was selling like hotcakes at one time. But they had actually put out the volume 2 of it. It just come out. This was $1.27. Someone paid it for this puppy. And then, like I said, Mr. Kennedy was assassinated, and the album dropped like a rock. But it doesn't mean you're not going to try and cash in on a concept if you got it going there. So they went on and did. Lyndon Johnson got a couple of the treatments as well, and they would trying to see if they're. Don't recognize as many actresses and actresses on this one. And then they really didn't do much in the 70s. However, not to be outdone, people were trying to cash in on that sort of concept of doing like a political skit humor. This one here is To Home with the Other Family, and it's actually based on Khrushchev. Larry Gaines wrote, but actually there's some well-known. James Gardner was involved in this one. George Siegel, Joan Rivers, Buck Henry, Don Michie. So again, it was a kind of a parody thing. Like I said, it was kind of the concept. And then in the 80s, they tried to revive it. Same producers, Earl Dowd. Von Meter put it back together, and they did a parody of the Reagan family here. First Family Rides Again had Rich Little involved. It did not sell as well, but it was kind of the end of the era for the skit comedy albums, as videotapes were coming into play and new technologies. And actually, I saw an interview once with Laurel and Hardy, and Laurel, when they asked him about his what he thought about his TV shows on TV, he said that people's attention spans have gotten shorter as technology's evolved. So he'd always wanted to re-edit them, and I think that's kind of the problem with some older comedy albums. It takes a long time to develop the jokes, and then they fall flat because attention span has gotten shorter as we've gotten more technology. Interesting, this had quite a few. Like I said, they had Rich Little, Melanie Chartoff, who was on Fridays, but most interesting, they had Zachariah, the Sharon will know this one, who listens a lot, as a gentleman down here is he was an older guy who would dress up as kind of a zombie and did movie introductions for like Spengoli does today. Let's see here, and got a couple more here. Like I said, it's mostly older ones here. Ooh, this one was marked down from 475. Buddy Hackett, he worked the circuit for a long time. And I know he was the one who told long tales. And he was also an early one known to work very blue. He was not afraid of using curse words. But this, it's on Coral Records, which they had a lot of early rock stars on that one. Buddy Hackett, how do you do? Buddy Hackett, he had a habit of doing a lot of Japanese impersonations, which probably wouldn't go over well today. But there you go. I know I saw him a lot on the talk shows when I was a kid. And then Smothers Brothers, got quite a few of them. I was always kind of a fan of them. They were kind of very hip, actually, in their time, and had some ties to St. Louis. I know they played a lot here in St. Louis. Mom Always Liked You Best is one of their albums. Their comedy hour is from their actual TV show. They're also musically inclined. And the blonde one there is a master yo-yo performer, and still is, I believe. But they had a lot of people, well-known people. Steve Martin wrote for their show. The gentleman who, Super Dave Osborne, Curb Your Tongue. Like I said, they would do some longer bits, and then they would play some music. Let's see. At the Purple Onion, and I have a copy of this that I bought recently. Cindy was with me. It has a really long inscription written out by the to someone here in St. Louis. They played Gaslight Score a lot as when they were coming up. Aesop's Favors, The Smothers Brothers Way. Let's see. Golden Hits Volume 2. A lot of those records were recorded live because they're very good live. And this is actually a nice Rhino reissue of their best of stuff. There you go. Let's see here. And then I'll finish up tonight with Soupy Sales, who did the circuit for a long time. He did, was actually stand-up comedian, but he also had a very big tie-in with children's, had a children's show for a long time. And then after all these years, and that was actually a later kind of a comeback album. And he also did Super Sales, and The Mouse was actually kind of a weird kind of novelty hit he had. But his biggest claim to fame, and I will put it in the comments on YouTube, but on his kid show, which was live, he apparently had someone came up and the stagehands had hired a stripper, and she was naked, at least top off, and there was always the shtick was that they had someone behind the door, and they would knock and he would open. He didn't know who it was. Sometimes it was a celebrity, sometimes it was just someone in a character, but they had a nude woman on the set, and they opened the door, and it was live TV and went over the air, and he was fired from his job, and he was kind of blacklisted. Didn't work for a long time, but I will Google that. I know that video is out there. I'll put it up, share it here on Facebook if I can find it. I'm sure, and on YouTube. But that's all I got for tonight. See what I can dig up for Friday night. Everyone stay safe out there. Take care of each other. Hopefully life will get closer to being out in the world again soon. Have a good evening. Always nice to talk to everyone. Leave comments and ideas if you want me to do something different. I know this is kind of weird talking like this, but it's an interesting thing. 100 years ago, we wouldn't be able to communicate with each other out there. I'm always happy to listen. Take care and have a good evening.